Yo guys, what is up? It is Heaven11 here today, and I am bringing you my month in review for the Premier League. I have gone and sort of looked at all the games and how they have played out, and I've sort of given my grade on how I think the teams have done this month. So we'll work our way from 1st down to 20th. So we will start off with Liverpool. They were the best performing home and away team, winning both, so getting all of their 6 points from both of those games. They had the second best goal difference with a +9, and they're sitting at the top of the table. They're picking up where they left off. They beat Norwich 4-1, Southampton 2-1, and Arsenal 3-1, and Burnley 3-0. They beat Arsenal convincingly, which is a good sign that they're beating a top 6 side with a lot of conviction. They don't sort of look off-put or anything. They know exactly what they sort of want to do, and well, they've made Arsenal look really poor whenever they come to Anfield, and they kept right on with that. They haven't really been tested yet, though, while saying that. Yes, Arsenal is a good side, but they're not like a Man City, which they do need to face here at some point. And they still had a good month despite losing Alisson, which I think bodes really well for them, because Alisson is a big part of why they do well, and seeing that Adrian can perform for them is a good sign. Maybe not the most ideal situation for them, but still good enough, I guess. And they won the Super Cup over Chelsea, and they got a manageable Champions League draw, something that they'll look to, go far in again. And so overall, despite losing Alisson, they've had a good month. They've picked up a silverware piece already, and they don't seem to look like they've lost any pace from last year, so I've given them an A-.
Cheers, Jeff.
Next, working our way into second place, we have Man City. They have won the games that they should have convincingly. Saying that, though, Tottenham was a game. I'll get into it. It's very iffy for me. They have the best goal difference in the Prem, though. They decimated West Ham 5-0, Bournemouth 3-1, and Brighton 4-0. They had a very questionable 2-2 draw against Spurs, where they basically outshot them 10-1, which is dreadful for a top 6 clash, where if one side is outshooting you 10-1, you definitely don't deserve to win. But VAR came to Tottenham's rescue with a last-minute winner from Jesus being denied. Personally, with the new handball rule, should have been disallowed, but no, it really wasn't like handball per se, how it used to be ruled, where it was like out and obvious or whatever. Laporte maybe couldn't have done much about it, so I don't know how much they could have changed on it, but it still screwed them out of 3 points that they should have had. It's, I guess, whatever for me. You kind of just have to look past it, despite having these few sort of knocks that they've had, where Sané, Mendy, and now Laporte look out. After the Brighton game, Laporte looked injured for sure, out for a long time. They won the Community Shield over Liverpool. Maybe not the most convincing game so far, but a win is a win, and now both teams have some silverware going neck and neck again, it seems like. They have a very manageable Champions League draw. They should easily get out of their group. They shouldn't have any challenges. It should basically be they're looking to get 12 points and higher. And Sterling and KDB look really formidable, both looking really solid. You can even throw Aguero into that mix, but I mean, Aguero has just basically picked up the goals that those two have sort of created for him. And Rodri looks like he's adjusted really well to life in the Premier League, so that's good news for them, as he's another option for them off the bench or a starter. And so, looking at all this, plus you notice that they have the most goals and the most assists out of every team in the Premier League. Where do you really turn where they can't do too much? City, to me, are still the super team that they were last year, and it seems that they picked up that way. But losing those points to Tottenham kills their grade for me, because they should still be right on pace with Tottenham, and so for me, they get a B.
Cheers, Jeff.
Next up in third place, we have our first not top 6 side. We have Leicester City. We drew with Wolves and Chelsea, but they beat Sheffield United 2-1 and Bournemouth 3-1. And Ndidi and Tielemans both are performing really well, and it seems that Prayet could fit into that as well if he starts playing a bit more. Maddison still looks really good, so their midfield is nice and strong. Rodgers has his squad knocking out for Europe again. Yes, it's a little early to call it, but I do think they're, being my sleeper team, most likely favorite to be in that Europa League spot now. looking at how Everton and Wolves have done, it definitely seems likely that they're going to be able to hold their form off really well here. Vardy is still firing in the goals when they need it, despite being on the right side of 30 now. He's still putting them in. He's still getting lots of goals for him, and big ones as well, so that's always good to see from your striker. They need to hold on to this form for displacing Chelsea and Man United. I feel they need to be consistently winning their games and consistently getting points against top six sides. They can't be dropping points against like Wolves or Everton if they really want that top six spot. They kind of need to win those games, edge them out as best they can. They should focus more on the league, I feel, and not the cups. If they really want Europe, they really can't bother themselves with too much other competitions. They really need to set aside and look towards the league to be their number one source for next season's success. And saying this, they have more passes completed than Liverpool, Arsenal, and Chelsea, so they really look formidable for not a top six side. And for me, they get an A.
Cheers, Jeff.
Next up, we have Crystal Palace, who are in fourth currently. Despite losing Wan-Bissaka, they almost look better. They've had up and down performances in games, losing to Sheffield United, drawing to Everton, beating Villa, and surprisingly beating Man United at Old Trafford. Zaha's not quite firing on the goals or the assists yet. He's not really making up the goal-scoring points yet. But I don't feel he's been unnoticed in that team. I feel he has still been there. Ayu's got a man of the match, and you know that obviously didn't just pop out of nowhere. He obviously had some sort of support. So it's good to see that Hodgson has worked his team into a really good spot so far. He's really disproved what I said earlier in the season, thinking that they only really had a championship-level squad. So personally, seeing them up here in fourth right now after the first month, it is definitely surprising on my behalf, I will admit, but they have really pulled it out of the bag here by beating United. I definitely think if they had beaten Sheffield United, we'd be looking at potentially maybe even a top 10 sort of finish for Crystal Palace. But so far, they don't look too bad on the road or too bad at home, so it's kind of debatable where they should sort of finish. Maybe they do get that top 10 at the end of the season. But you also see that they have 3 points from away fixtures and 4 points from home fixtures. So they are a balanced side. They do seem to find ways to get points where they need them. And so I've given them, for their final grade, an A.
Cheers, Jeff.
Next up, we look to see that we have West Ham in fifth. They recovered after being decimated in that first game by City 5-0. One of the better away sides with 4 out of 6 points. Fabianski, I feel, is a major reason that they are finishing so high up, because their defense, to me, doesn't look as confident or well proven as some of the other teams that are sort of up here in the league. They drew with Brighton. They beat Watford 3-1 and Norwich 2-0. They're the highest side with a negative goal difference, though. They have -1, so that shows that defense is leaky and that they sort of are recovering on offense, but maybe not as well. Their defense definitely needs to strengthen, in my opinion. I'm going to keep preaching that until they figure it out. Their defense is not strong enough for me. They need to find consistency through defense, and, well, Pellegrini's never really been stupendous at getting the defense organized, but if they want Europe, they really do need to focus on that, because so far it's not looked good for them. And some of the tactics that Pellegrini has instituted has made it really hard to win their games. During the Brighton game specifically, he brought on Antonio, and it shifted the game. It put it in West Ham's favor. But before that, West Ham looked dead. They looked tired. They looked out of it. They didn't look prepared for what Brighton had for them. And then when he put on Antonio, it pushed back our defensive line. It pushed on, and it made it really tough for us. So I feel if he changes up some of his tactics and he can figure out a way to work out a defense, I feel they will improve and they'll win even more games. They need to do that more by getting those inconsistencies that they have out of matches. But another really sort of dead giveaway to me was that they gave up against Man City, which you never want to see from a team that sort of pushes on to get European places, because if they're giving up against a top 6 side, what are they going to do if a smaller side's beating them? So I've given them a B-.
Cheers, Jeff.
Arsenal kicked off the season with good wins against the softer sides, and they seriously need to work on improving their form against top 6 sides, because I saw something where it was like over 1,300 days they have gone without an away win to a top 6 side. You can't do that. That's basically leaving yourself with, out of a possible 18 points on the road, you're ending up with 0, which kills a title race or any sort of push on the top 4. They definitely need to break that curse if they want to get this top 4 this season. I think Ceballos has made a really big impact on their midfield this season. He looks really formidable, I feel. He's got a man of the match under his belt. He's got 2 assists. He's looked really strong in that midfield. He looks like a Ozil sort of second coming. But, in the games that they've won, they've only beat Burnley 2-1 and Newcastle 1-0. They lost convincingly to Liverpool 3-1, which you just don't want to see if you're a top 6 side. You don't want to lose to other top 6 sides when they look convincingly beat. Aubameyang and Lacazette still look very fiery. They still have a very good partnership. And I feel that Guendouzi looks just as good as any of the other midfield options that they have at the club. Personally, I think he should start in some games against the smaller sides. I feel it would really benefit his game, and he does benefit the game itself. Their Europa League group was not bad. They should easily get out of it. It shouldn't be too hard for them to manage all these competitions, especially knowing Emery, how he did last season. So they should be able to compete. They just don't want to stretch themselves out too much, I feel, because they've loaned out Monreal and they sold El Neni, so they're kind of getting rid of that deep squad depth that they had. That was beneficial to them, but they need to do well in every competition that they're in. I don't think they can just sort of focus on the league and expect to sort of be better than all of the other London sides. And for me, they need to find their form against the top 6 sides. I feel they don't really challenge them enough when they are playing them, and they tend to lose a lot of points there with them. So I feel if they really want to improve, they have to start winning points off of top 6 sides. But they still have a game in hand, as they have the North London Derby tomorrow. But it's technically considered September, so it doesn't get included in the video. But nonetheless, I've given Arsenal a B-.
Cheers, Jeff.
Next up, I have Manchester United, who had a great start after beating Chelsea 4-0 at home, but then they've been poor ever since. They drew with Wolves in a 10-man Southampton, and they lost to Crystal Palace at home 2-1. Ole looks very well towards the youth. He plays James a lot. He plays Martial, Rashford a lot up front. He plays Wan-Bissaka and Maguire in the back every game. And he seems to be sort of selling out their older players, like Smalling left on loan, Sanchez is out, Lukaku's gone. So he's definitely looking towards the youth now, as he's trying to sort of solidify his position. Pogba's there in the midfield, but he's not really shining yet, and I felt that he really needed to start shining if they wanted to make a lot of improvements this year. James and Wan-Bissaka are probably Man United's most quality players right now, in my opinion. I feel they both bring a lot to the table for that side, and I feel that they both, in their own rights, have done really well for the side. De Gea is struggling for good, consistent form still from last season, which really sucks because he is a top-class keeper. I mean, I made him one of the art backgrounds in my studio, so I clearly think highly of him, and for me, he's definitely not performing how he used to. The Crystal Palace goal is evident of that. Their Europa League draw has made it seem like they should really focus on making it very far into that tournament versus sort of letting the league decide where they kind of end up. I feel if they focus on the Europa League, they'll have a really good chance at the Champions League because their Europa League group is very easy to get out of, and they've won it before. They won it in 2016 when they beat Ajax, so it's not like they don't know how to sort of win these sort of tournaments, but I definitely feel it should be their focus. They need to sort of correct their wrongs of the recent slip-ups, and they need to get back into a winning form if they are to keep pushing for top 4 naturally. I mean, every side who wants to be in top 4 does need to win on a consistent basis, and so far United really haven't shown that. Maguire looks good, but I still don't feel he's worth the £80 million figure he was worth, or that United paid for him. Their away form needs the strongest improvement because they only have 2 points from the 2 games they've played away. They've dropped 4 points on the road, which is never a good start. I mean, it's just something that they really need to correct as soon as they can. And for me, they don't look anywhere near Man City or Liverpool, even though this was meant to be their big rebuild year where they come back into the league and look really solid and good. So Overall, they get a C+ from me.
Cheers, Jeff.
Next up, we have Sheffield United, who for me are the most surprising side with how high up they are currently at the end of the month. They have only lost one game. They lost to Leicester 2-1. They drew with Bournemouth and Chelsea, and they came back against Chelsea. They were 2-0 down after Abraham brace, and they came back and won, and they didn't win. They drew 2-2, and they beat Crystal Palace 1-0, and they've been the best promoted side so far, even though Norwich and Aston Villa looked like on paper they would have the better squads come the end of the month. Their whole squad is really performing well, and they're not giving up on games, which is a really good mentality to have for a promoted side in the Premier League. It gets you a lot of points. It helps you sort of stay into games. As we saw with the Chelsea game, they came back even after being 2-0 down. For me, Lundstrom has been their standout player. He's been really good in the midfield for them, and he's been really solid all around. They're first for the most long balls played in the Premier League, and they're second most for most crosses in the league, so they are making a lot of chances for themselves. They're not just sort of sitting back and finding lucky goals. They're at least trying to find these chances that they want to create. And they have to keep this form up if they are to stay up. They have to find a way to get points out of any game that they possibly can. And Wilder has been performing, for me, a modern miracle so far by making them the best promoted side. I felt that they were going to be beaten by Chelsea, Leicester, and Bournemouth of sorts sides. I thought they would all beat Sheffield United. Maybe not easily, but they definitely thought they wouldn't drop as many points as they had to Sheffield. So for me, Sheffield gets an A+.
Cheers, Jeff.
Next up, we have Chelsea, where Super Frank has not impressed me yet, and he's really relied on youth, maybe too much in some cases. He has only won once, and he beat Norwich 3-2. Even that was a dicey game, really could have gone a bunch of different ways. He drew to Sheffield and Leicester, which were both at home, so Stamford Bridge really isn't a fortress for them, which you kind of need your home stadium to be a fortress for you. And they lost to Man United on the first day 4-0, which doesn't bode well if you're losing to a big rival 4-0 on the opening day. Abraham is finding goals, which is a good sign. He had a brace today against Sheffield United, so that's always a positive when you're trying to play a younger player up front, and he is finding the back of the net consistently. There's stretches in matches where I feel that they lose their consistency. They sort of go through mental lapses. It was towards the end of the game, in the Leicester game when I watched, where it was really back and forth, and it could have really diced it up anyways. And when they were up against Norwich, they let Norwich sort of come back into the game, which you shouldn't ever let a side like that sort of just slip into the game again. So for me, it's like you got to kind of be consistent throughout the game. Their Champions League draw was difficult, but it's very manageable for them. I feel if they play their cards right and they sort of do what they have to do, they will get out of their group. Mount and Zuma have both been really solid players for me. They're just struggling to find a real consistent form throughout the basis of this. They have the second most passes in the Prem, and you can see that because you have Zuma, Jorginho, and Emerson. They all have over 250 passes each just in this month. So you can kind of see that they're a passing side, but it doesn't necessarily always translate to goals because they are the top 6 side with the lowest goal difference. They're at a -3. So for me, they get a D+.
Cheers, Jeff.
Next up, we have Tottenham, and for me, I don't really have much to say. Their stats sort of speaks for themselves. They beat Aston Villa with a second-half comeback for a 3-1 result. They drew to Man City 2-2, which they really shouldn't have. They did not deserve a point from that game. They should have gotten beat well off the field. And they lost to Newcastle 1-0. Poch hasn't been playing, in my opinion, his 2 most influential players that when they come off the bench, they do make the biggest change for me, and Eriksen and Vertonghen. I don't know why he's not playing them. They should be bona fide starters in that lineup. They got a manageable Champions League draw. They really only have Bayern as a big competition. But if Poch doesn't figure out his tactics again, they could struggle in that group, I guess. They still probably will qualify, but it wouldn't be as convincing. And it seems to me that since making the final last year of the Champions League, they've digressed. Their squad looks weak. Their tactics are kind of off. And Poch doesn't seem like the man anymore for that team. Although he's done great work, I just feel this season's kind of started off. I mean, they lost to Newcastle, which I couldn't have predicted. I wouldn't have been able to tell you that I would have seen that one coming. They getting outshot 10-1 against Man City. Like, this isn't a side that's looked good by any means so far. They look tired and lost sometimes for me against City, which a Pochettino side never has looked like that really. And comparing this to recent Tottenham sides, this is nothing like what I would have expected from them this early in the season. For me, they get an F.
Cheers, Jeff.
Now moving down the table once again, we have Burnley. They beat Southampton 3-1, but they have losses to Arsenal, which it was 2-1, and they lost 3-0 to Liverpool. They also drew with Wolves, so they're kind of having an up and down sort of start. I mean, they've got points in the games you would expect them to kind of get points, and they've dropped points in the games where you sort of expect that to sort of happen. But Ashley Barnes is a big reason that they do have as many points as they do. They have the least amount of passes in the Prem, but they also have the most saves, so it kind of is working out that way, and they have the second most long balls. So, I mean, I guess if you're not passing a lot, you might as well make really useful passes and clear a lot of field with it. So it's just been an average month for me from Burnley, but they should look to get a few more wins. They need to pick up a lot more points if they are to sort of stay away from that relegation battle here towards Christmas. And when they're playing similar skilled teams, you kind of want them to either draw or win. That should be their expectation when they're at home and on the road, I feel. But for me, it's not a bad month for them, but it's not necessarily been good, so I give them just a regular old C.
Cheers, Jeff.
Now moving on, we have Everton. They drew to Crystal Palace, they've beaten Watford, and they've lost to Aston Villa 2-0. They have the least amount of goals in the Prem with just one. They have a game in hand, though, still, because they're playing on Sunday. I mean, it's not been a very beneficial start, to say the least. Like, they've only got 1 goal in 3 games, which is never a good sign, especially when you're drawing 0-0 and you're getting shut out at Aston Villa. Like, you're a side that wants to be in Europe and you're not really showing it so far. Digne and Pickford for me have been solid for them despite all of this stuff, and I feel Bernard has shown flashes of greatness, but he hasn't really been consistent enough for me. They have the 3rd least passes and the 4th lowest tackles and the 3rd lowest shots in the Prem, so they're really underperforming in a lot of areas, and they don't have a real striking threat like a down the middle bona fide striker. So Silva's not really showing a good attacking sense. They're really disappointed the start of the season, and for me it's been a really poor month, and they really need to step up their form if they are to start challenging again for a European place, or if they want to even make a top 10 finish this year. I mean, granted, it's the first month, but if their form really does continue like this, they could finish in like an 11th or 12th place and just have a really disappointing season. So for me, they get a D+ for the month.
Cheers, Jeff.
Now moving on to Southampton. They lose games like Burnley, where they lose 3-0, and Liverpool 2-1. And then you look and you see that they beat Brighton 2-0, but Brighton only had 10 men. And they drew with Man United 1-1, and you're like, where's sort of the middle ground with this team? What's sort of what you can expect from them? And I feel like Hasenhüttl is not having the best time sort of settling into this new season. They have really struggled for goals. They're 15th for goals, and they're 14th for passing. And for me, Angus Gunn looks really poor in games. I mean, he has a good shot-stopping ability, but when he plays it out of the back or when he takes goal kicks, granted they're good and long, so he keeps it away from the back of the play, but some of them are really inconsistent and not really finding their targets a lot. And for me, Ward-Prowse and Højbjerg have been good. They haven't been necessarily stupendous. So I feel for me, if they can sort of find that consistent basis, then they'll really step up their midfield and it'll sort of help the team overall improve. But they need to find a good system, because sort of right now they seem to be a little all over the place. Hasenhüttl hasn't really settled the team down, and they've been really all over the board for me. So for me, they get a D.
Cheers, Jeff.
Now moving into Newcastle, they have losses to Arsenal and Norwich, which they've looked pretty poor in both of those games, but shockingly they've beaten Tottenham 1-0. Granted, the game was a deserved win. It was just sort of that shock result that you don't really expect. They drew 1-1 with Watford. kind of in a similar sense to Southampton. They've been all over the board this month. They haven't really settled into a tactic or system that's been proven for them yet. I think Joe Ellington isn't too bad off, but he's not really there yet for them. Dummett, Shar, and Lascelles have been very prolific for them, and I feel they're doing the best that they can with sort of what's in front of him. Almiron really hasn't struck gold yet for me. I feel, even though I predicted him to be sort of breakout this season, he hasn't really done it. I mean, granted, he has Steve Bruce, who doesn't look like the man for the job, really, sort of managing him and how he's going to sort of have to play in a role. I feel it's just not really a system that's going to really work out for him. And for me, they just can't lose too many games next month if they really want to keep fighting for the survival. Because right now they're 17th for passes and goals. Granted, when it's early in the season, these sort of stats that I've listed out aren't too crucial, but it's still a sign of maybe what could happen. So you don't really want to let it get too out of hand. So for me, Newcastle get a C+, just because they are higher up than I would have predicted them by the end of this month.
Cheers, Jeff.
Now you move into Bournemouth. They drew with Sheffield United 1-1. They beat Villa 2-1, and they've lost to City and Leicester both 3-1. For me, I'm noticing right away they don't have a clean sheet yet. You kind of got to worry about that. Your defense maybe really should shore up. I mean, granted, who they're playing at goalkeeper, Aaron Ramsdale, is young, so he is probably a little bit more prone to mistakes. Ake, granted, he's sort of, you can't really call him a veteran yet, but he has been sort of in front of that back line and leading it for him for a little while now. So you kind of hope that he'd be a little bit more solid in front of Ramsdale. But for me, Harry Wilson has been a great coup for Bournemouth. He's got a beautiful free kick goal and another goal that he scored earlier. And Billing has been really solid in the midfield for him. But one thing you kind of have to worry about is they're 16th for tackles, but they're 5th for blocks. So if they're not really getting their challenges in right, but they're blocking off a lot of shots, it seems like they kind of need to work on finding a middle ground so they're not really blocking a lot more and they're kind of making those challenges in the first place so they aren't giving up as many chances. And I feel like that's another area that they could work on. There's just like a few key areas maybe that they should work on, just improving slightly, and it could probably really help their system out and getting them on a consistent basis. This hasn't really been the worst start for them, but it hasn't also been the best start. So it's kind of hard to really judge where they're at right now, but I'm going to give them a C.
Cheers, Jeff.
Now moving in, we have Brighton. They beat Watford opening day 3-0, and then they drew to West Ham 1-1, and then they lose to Southampton 2-0 and Man City today 4-0. They started off really good, promising. You get 4 points out of 6, and then you get none out of 6. So they're looking good under Potter's new system, the 3 at the back with the midfield 4. It is working. You can see the players are confident. They are attacking, and Potter's sort of given them that sort of confidence boost that I think the players needed. Dan Burn, for me, has been a standout in that back line of 3. He's come into Duffy and Dunk's partnership, and he's looked just as solid as either of them has looked in the previous 2 seasons. They have the 5th most tackles and the 15th most shots. So if they're really solid on the defensive front, but they're not quite getting their chances off, you kind of feel like if they're making the plays to get those interceptions and tackles in, then they really need to translate that into an attacking sense and sort of push on and get the chances that they need. It's a very average starting month, I'd feel. 4 out of, 12 points. You don't want too many months like that, but it's not maybe an end-all, be-all sort of month. But for me, I think they need to find a way to break down teams that are sort of similar levels to them. They can't really let more of those points slip. They definitely need to hone in on getting points off of the similar side. So for me, they get a C. Next up, we have Wolverhampton Wanderers. They drew every single game they've drawn with Leicester, Man United, and Burnley. They're the lowest saves, corners, and shots in the Prem. They're 18th for tackles and 19th for passes and crosses. They have had terrible league form so far. They have, they're not losing, but they're not winning. They're not getting a lot of points. This definitely isn't the Wolves side we saw last year. And again, I'm going to reiterate this all year, I feel. Europa League is taking its toll on these guys. They have a game in hand, but you look at what they had to do. The Europa League qualifiers just ended. The group stage for the Europa League is starting here soon. They do have a manageable group. They probably should get out of their group. They can't really let this league form slip out of hand before they realize it's too late and they're way down in the bottom of the table. Not really relegation, but it's like they are fighting. They don't look anything like last year's side, which is a real shame because, yeah, you saw Ruben Neves' superb strike against United, but it's like they just have flashes. They don't really have that consistent basis down yet. The European places for next season, should they not win the competition, do look out of place for them next year. I don't think they'll finish there. And for me, this terrible start for Wolves gets an F.
Cheers, Jeff.
Now moving on to the first team in a relegation place, we have Aston Villa. They have a 1-0 loss to Crystal Palace, a 2-0 loss to Bournemouth, and a 3-1 loss to Tottenham. They got a nice 2-0 win over Everton. They don't look maybe the most solid, but they definitely don't give up on games. Mings has been very good for them. He's been a brick wall for them on this defensive line when Heaton's maybe looked a little out of place. Their defensive line has been solid, although it's been leaky at times. You can't really put that all on Mings and Heaton, but you definitely can sort of say that they have given up maybe too many goals at certain points. And they don't really have a true goal scorer yet. Wesley, in the recent sort of games, has picked up his form. He's found the back of the net. But they're 15th for passes, so it's like they're not really getting all their possession down yet. They kind of just struggling around for chances. And for me, they kind of look like Fulham in a way, but it's really hard to tell because it is so early in the season. You can't really say that, yeah, they're going down yet. But they have the most losses so far out of every team, so they kind of need to find anything that starts to work. Otherwise, it's going to be a really long grind to get through any sort of survival hopes. So for me, they get a D-.
Cheers, Jeff.
Now we are on to Norwich. They seem to be involved in a really high-scoring amount of games. They have losses to West Ham, which were 2-0, Chelsea, which was 3-2, and Liverpool, which was 4-1. And then they beat Newcastle 3-1. They don't have a clean sheet yet, so they're 1 of 5. Aarons and Lewis have looked promising, the two outside backs for them. And I mean, you can't put pressure on, two 20-year-olds to kind of lead that back line. So I feel they do need to shore up their defense. They need to find maybe someone like a Jagielka or a Cahill. Those could have been smart signings had they gotten them. They're scoring a lot, but they're letting too many in, so they can't really push forward on it. Pukki is really leading the line for him as he's found the back of the net on a very consistent basis. He has 5 goals in 4 games. So if you have someone who's scoring goals, then you can't really say, well, we're not scoring goals to win these games. It's more your defense is letting you down and you can't really recover your form in each game. Their system really could work. They just need this solid defense to start implanting itself, and then I'm sure it'll work out for them because they have a never seem to quit attitude. They always seem to stay in their game. You saw it in the Liverpool game. They were definitely down and out, but they definitely still had an attitude about them where they did want to keep pressing forward and look good. So for me, they get a C- because they can definitely turn this around and they can definitely rescue their season still after a poor month.
Cheers, Jeff.
Moving into the team in 20th, you have the dreadful Watford. They have the worst goal difference. They don't have a single win, no clean sheets. They lost to Brighton 3-0, Everton 1-0, and West Ham 3-1. And they luckily drew with Newcastle 1-1 to just have any point this season. They have only scored 2 goals. Their stats don't necessarily replicate what's being shown on the results. They're not they're mid-table for passing, mid-table for shots. They're just not scoring. They're just not having good defensive shape because you can't build up an attack if your defense is letting in a goal and you don't seem to have a solid striking option that's putting them in consistently. They need to find anything that works and start doing it soon. Otherwise, this is going to be a really long haul, and they're probably going to be a bottom half of the table sort of team if this sort of continues. They need to find some form. For me, I don't see any sort of standout player in this performances. Like, they look all poor. Like, they haven't been playing good. And it's like, Gracia needs to just figure out something. Like, you can't just get 1 point from 1 month. It's a terrible performance, and they get an F.
Cheers, Jeff.
Now moving into my last section of the video, I have picked 5 standout players for the month. My first player, these aren't in like an order, these are just sort of the 5 players I feel have done the best. In first, I have Luca Digne. He has 1 assist, 2.3 key passes per game, 2 tackles per game, and 2.3 clearances per game, and he has picked up 2 men of the matches. Then we have Teemu Pukki, 5 goals, 1 assist, 0.8 dribbles per 90, 1 key pass per 90, and 1 man of the match award. Then you have a resurrected Kevin De Bruyne. He has 1 goal, 5 assists, 4 key passes, 1 dribble, and an 8.17 rating per 90, and with 1 man of the match award. Now moving into the fourth player, we have Ashley Barnes, 4 goals and 2 man of the match awards this month. He's not had maybe the most stupendous month, but he is consistently performing for him. And then the last player we have is Daniel James. He has 3 goals, 0.5 key passes per game, and 0.3 dribbles per game with 1 man of the match award. So those are my 5. If I had to pick a player of the month out of these 5, I'd definitely say KDB. If you have an 8.17 rating per 90 and you're completing 4 key passes with 5 assists, you can't really top much more than that. So for me, I would say my player of the month, if I had to choose one, would be KDB. Let me know down below what you think of how I've graded your team. If you agree or disagree with anything that I've said, or if you feel how your teams will do next month. But for now, this has been Heaven 11, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.